Duke University.
This is Office Hours at Duke University. Today, Tom Rankin gives an insider's view of this year's Full-Frame Documentary Film Festival. Rankin is the director of Duke's Center for Documentary Studies and a longtime organizer and supporter of Full Frame. He is a photographer, filmmaker, and folklorist, and author of Local Heroes Changing America, Indivisible. In 2005 and 2006, he served as chair of the Board of Trustees of the American Folklife Center. To submit a question for Rankin, send an email to live@duke.edu, tweet with the tag Duke Live, or post to the Duke University Facebook page. You can watch today's discussion again anytime on Duke On Demand.
Hello and welcome to Office Hours from Duke University. My name is Mike Schoenfeld. This weekend, the center of the documentary film universe moves from cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C. to Durham, North Carolina. That's because the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival opens its doors for 4 days of screenings, programs, panels, discussions, and, of course, what would a film festival be without parties? It's one of the largest and most important documentary film festivals in the world, drawing more than 30,000 people to see more than 100 films that were selected from over 1,200 entrants. Full Frame started in 1998 with significant support from Duke University, and this year it has, in fact, come full circle, if you will. Last year, the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival rejoined Duke through the Center for Documentary Studies and has continued to expand now into year-round education programs, into workshops for producers and directors, both current and aspiring, and into a large range of community-based programming as well, films throughout the year. Our guest today is Tom Rankin, the director of the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University, a longtime documentary filmmaker and photographer, a folklorist, someone who's chronicled American culture over the years, but with a special interest and a special passion for showing it to people through the documentary art. Tom, welcome to Office Hours.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks.
It's a very busy week for you and for everybody at CDS and for the Full Frame folks. It's springtime in Durham, and that means Full Frame.
It's exciting. It's when I like to say we turn Durham from the city of higher education or the city of medicine or to the city of documentary.
Talk a little bit about documentary. We'll let the English professors figure out
the right pronunciation.
There are lots of definitions. Documentary has become very popular. Michael Moore, Morgan Spurlock, An Inconvenient Truth, all very significant players now in the film world, but also in the media world. How do you define documentary?
Well, it's one of the things that keeps us in conversation, and one of the wonderful things about documentary is the constantly evolving boundaries and discussions. But I like to use James Agee's notion of human actuality as somewhat of a central notion about documentary, that it's a place, a way of knowing by looking at the way people live in the world. It can be very activist-driven at times. It can be very personal. Ross McElwee, a North Carolina filmmaker whose films are very much have him in it. They can be highly poetic, or they can be highly driven by sort of the aspiration to intervene in policy. And one of the great things about documentary is that full sweep. People are puzzled all the time. Is this a documentary? Is it? And we always find people going back to this idea: is it objective? And I think that's where documentary. One of the things we're learning as people look at more documentaries, one of the things they learn is that all documentaries are constructed. In that sense, they all have a point of view. And, in terms of teaching, it's a wonderful way to get students to think about just what's being said and how it's being said and how they can better learn how to communicate.
And how, over the years, how have documentaries changed? Both format and tone?
Well, I think that, we're in the heyday of documentary, I would say. The last 15 years, there has been just a proliferation of people documentary. So what's happened in that period is we've seen much greater diversity in how people define documentary, the subjects they pursue and how they pursue it. There was a time, the 1930s, documentary came out of really government. We won't call it necessarily propaganda in the most negative sense, but it was government films funded by the government, funded by the New Deal to express the problems in America and the need for something like a Roosevelt approach. That has a huge impact on the documentary tradition, America's moment in the 1930s and documentary expression in the 30s. Since then, we've seen that thread continue, but we've also seen a real proliferation of diversity in how people use it. And with the coming of video, what I like to say is everybody can be a cameraman. Everybody with a camera isn't necessarily a filmmaker, but everybody can get their hands on a camera, and that wasn't always the case, and that's really opened up things.
We tend to think of documentaries as films, as narratives, a product with a narrative, with a narrator, with a beginning, with a middle, with an end. One of the things that you do at CDS is really expand the notion of what documentary production is into photography, into radio, and increasingly into digital media as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you maintain the same ethos of the documentary?
Well, at the Center for Documentary Studies, we sort of have four mediums when we talk about it in terms of mediums. We do talk about it as film, audio, photography, and then documentary writing, long-form creative nonfiction. And those have been threads in the documentary tradition since the mid to late 19th century, if you really want to look back. But the common, if you get on an airplane and you say Center for Documentary Studies, people think the person sitting next to you thinks it's a film center. And we really see it as documentary expression across medium, and increasingly, as you suggest, a kind of mixed medium. So you get students who are not one or the other. They're not just filmmakers, they're also radio producers or they're writers. And you see that at the festival. We're going to talk in a minute about The Interrupters, a film made by Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz. And Kotlowitz is a writer. This is his first film. So the storytelling is at the bedrock of documentary, how to tell a story. Sometimes that is, as you say, a traditional narrative with an arc and a beginning, middle, and end. Increasingly, we're seeing films that are more lyrical and conceptual. And you may not be able to locate the beginning, middle, and end. It may be more of a sense of being somewhere and what it looked like and felt like. So it's an emotional truth as opposed to a narrative truth.
Is reality TV a form of documentary?
Well, there's the question the grand conundrum. Obviously documentaries engage with reality, and it's broadcast often. So reality TV sounds a whole lot like documentary. I think my answer to that would be it simply depends. A lot of reality TV is more TV than reality, and we tend to look for, where is the real, where is the authentic, where's the engagement. Documentary has a real investment in long-term engagement and in a kind of reciprocity. So if I make a film about you, it's not just 2 minutes of your life. I'm not just there for a couple of minutes. I'm there for a good while, and we really engage. And so, a lot of reality TV is kind of here today, gone tomorrow, and I think that is not the same. We also see the question, is journalism documentary? Some journalism, somebody embeds themselves in a family for 16 weeks and writes walks, talks a whole lot like documentary. Coming in, into your backyard one day and asking you a few questions and leaving. Not so much.
Good. Let's talk about the Full Frame Film Festival. It dates back to 1998, sprang from the Center for Documentary Studies, and has since grown into really a juggernaut in the documentary world.
Yeah, I came in 1998. I remember the first I was actually interviewing for the job the weekend of Full Frame, and there were in the Carolina Theater opening night.
It was either shrewd or lucky.
About 100 people for the opening night film, which seemed like a grand event because it was the first year. Since then, Full Frame has grown to 30,000 tickets, people, and as you say, the one of the central documentary events. It has, it's sort of, when Nancy Bursky had the idea to start it, at the center, it was really at the beginning of this flourishing of documentary. And so we've had that, but it also was at the beginning, and I said this to Mayor Bill Bell of Durham, it was at the beginning of interesting things happening in Durham, interesting things happening at Duke around the arts and around a projection of our intellectual values outward. And I think, it's all sort of congealed into a wonderful moment in the last 13 to 15 years where we see the film festival is really being very placed. This festival couldn't happen just anywhere. Downtown Durham is unique, and people come from LA and New York, and they talk about that. And it's a filmmakers festival. It's a festival that focuses on filmmaking. There's some market discussions, some distributors, but essentially it's about the craft and the storytelling. And in that way, it really segues well into what we're trying to do in classes, both undergraduate and graduate, starting a graduate program. And so the festival is, as much as it's a part of the world of documentary, it's also very much a part of the day-to-day life of Duke and Durham.
Now, we hear those who are interested in film, follow film, will know about film festivals, the Full Frame, Sundance, Tribeca. Mm-hmm. But how does a film festival work?
Well, a film festival really does operate on this whole notion of competition. That is that people enter. There's approximately 60 films at Full Frame in competition, which means they got in. There were 1,200 submitted. They were selected, and they can get prizes and awards and recognition. When you make a film, you want to get it out there, and you're looking for momentum. You're looking for affirmation. And film festivals are one way that filmmakers get that, and so that's part of it. The other part is there's a whole curated section of the film festival, which is a way of kind of historicizing or exploring a particular theme. This year we have a theme of the archive, and Steve Prellinger's done a wonderful job at introducing this whole notion of how important it is to look back into the archive. But the film festival for a contemporary filmmaker is the place. It is the where they meet the public for the first time with films. And so you find people that have I think we've got 28 premieres at this festival. That some of those are North American premieres, some of them are world premieres, but 28 premieres. And for those filmmakers, this is the coming out party. And this may be the second or third coming out party for others. There's some that were at Sundance and that are here. How did it go at Sundance? It's a very different kind of audience here. How does it go here? We're documentary intensive. This is not a film festival that has anything other than documentary, whereas Sundance and Tribeca and many of the others are fiction and nonfiction films. So this is, I think it was D.A. Pennebaker who said something to the fact that, writers have bars and filmmakers have Full Frame. It's the place that the community can come together and kind of talk about what they've done and what they're doing and where they're going and how they're going to get there.
You are watching Office Hours from Duke University. You can participate. In fact, we demand that you participate. You can email questions to live@Duke. You can contact us by the Duke University Facebook page, or you can tweet us at Duke Live. And we're here with Tom Rankin, the director of the Center for Documentary Studies, and the person who is the executive producer maybe of the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival, which opened last night in Durham and will go through the weekend. Let's, as they might say, let's go to the videotape. Let's talk about some of the.
Well, let's talk about a film that from the Ukraine, Pit Number 8. We've got two coal films, and you see themes that come through film festivals over the years. There was a year when a couple of years when there were plethora of films about Cuba. I like to say that the arts is powered in part by polygenesis. We're all sort of thinking about things. So we're all thinking about energy, and we're thinking about coal, and we're thinking about labor and work. And Pit Number 8's from the Ukraine, a coal mining region of Ukraine, where a community of folks are in poverty are really going back to these abandoned mines. And it's both a beautiful film, and this is one of the themes of documentary, a gorgeous constructed piece of art out of a really harsh reality. That tension is something you see throughout Full Frame. I hear so many people come out of films and say, man, that is a dark film, but it's so beautiful. And so let's look at a little bit of pit number 8. And this is a family. The film's kind of structured around a 15-year-old boy, Yura, and their effort to mine coal in the Ukraine. It's a North American premiere.
Okay, let's roll. Just turn it. Okay. Can I just?
See with every film now, just is every film that comes out, it's got to have a website, right? And that's pretty much as important as the beginning and middle of the film. And what we just saw for pit number 8 is the trailer, which is in film parlance the tease. It's the way that a filmmaker tries to get you interested in the story. Like a lot of documentaries, and this is another back to that question of what is a documentary. This is a film about a very particular place, a very particular family, a very particular issues of child labor and survival, but it's also a universal. Child labor is not an issue that is only in Ukraine. Poverty is not an issue only in Ukraine. Coal is not an issue only in the Ukraine. So you get this deep exploration of one family, but the story is much more of a universal story. And in this festival, kind of connects with The Last Mountain, a film about mountaintop removal in Appalachia. A much more mechanized, but it's all this dependence on coal and what's it going to mean and how are we going to survive and what's it mean for the environment, what's it mean for the day-to-day life of families.
Now, is Pit 8 made by a Ukrainian filmmaker?
Yeah.
Can you tell the difference between, is there a Ukrainian or a Russian, Eastern European sensibility?
You do see some, we've had wonderful films from Northern Europe, from the Netherlands, for instance. There is a kind of there's some filmmakers in Europe whose films are much more, I shouldn't say more, but their characteristic is a poetic, kind of quiet beauty that you don't just see everywhere. If you had a stack of films and you look, I can remember a film from a few years ago called The Egg Lady that we now have in the Duke Library. It's just a gorgeous film, and if you left and they said, "What's it about?" it would be hard to tell anybody, explain what happened, because not a lot happened, except your experience of being there was maybe the best thing you experienced at the film festival. And so there is a kind of quiet, pensive rumination with some European films that are harder to get a foothold in this country.
So American films, action films especially, translate very well around the world. Mm-hmm. They're hugely popular, dub the language or subtitle it, and a car chase is a car chase. Does the same thing hold in the documentary world as well?
No, that's to say there's much more diversity, and it's harder to. There's much more cross-pollination going on in the documentary world, and right now, there's a move to talk about experimental documentary. We're starting a graduate program called an MFA in experimental and documentary arts. Well, what in the world could that be? And part of the reason we're doing it is the boundaries, the crossing of boundaries, which has always been something in the arts. but I'd say is happening even more in documentary right now than ever before. And so we want to sort of embrace the opportunity to say, well, what boundaries should we cross? What happens when we cross them? And you see that in the style of filmmaking. You see very narrative, sort of polemical or very hard charging filmmaking, and you see other films that are again, it's hard when you show them to students and say, well, what's the point of view of the filmmaker? What do they think should happen? They're not trying to tell you what should happen. Mm-hmm. They're telling you where you are, what people feel day to day, and how it looks.
And yet some can be incredibly entertaining. I watched Client 9 the other day, the documentary about Elliot Spitzer, about the downfall of Elliot Spitzer,
right,
which was as fast-paced and as entertaining, including with an actor or playing one of the roles, as any film, as any fiction film that I've seen in recent years.
Well, one of the things that people have, know is that the best way, that humor is really a way to keep audiences engaged. We saw a film last night, the opening night film, Guilty Pleasures, about silhouette romance novels and people's, follows 5 people in their engagement, if you will, around the sort of fantasy world of the romance novel and then the reality of their life. It was very, very funny. In the first 30 minutes, you weren't so sure it was ever going to get off the kind of funny bar. Mm-hmm. But by the end, that humor had allowed us to get to a place of some real human emotion that we probably couldn't have gotten to or would have resisted getting to quite so quickly. And so humor is it's like an open door. Michael Moore uses it as well as anybody. Mm-hmm. He has people who don't agree at all with his point of view coming to see his films because of his kind of bumbling humor. Or I mentioned Ross McElwee, who's one of the funniest people in Sherman's March. Yeah. So serious topics, but propelled by humor, and I think that that's a tough thing. Not just every filmmaker can pull that off or would want to, but we're seeing it more and more.
We'll get back to the films in a second. We have a couple of questions that we want to get to here. First, email from Sharon. Does Full Frame offer any screenings or other programs at other times of the year?
Yes, we have year-round programming of all kinds. We have a summer series at American Tobacco in downtown Durham. This year it'll be around the theme of music and kind of key music films. It's outdoor screenings, and we have something we call the Full Frame Fix at the National Museum of Art, kind of a sort of mini festival, and then the Full Frame and CDS, we collaborate on lots of screenings at other times, special screenings around new films that we think need to be seen or need to be re-seen. It could be a rescreening of something that's been at Full Frame. So there's quite a bit of effort to reach out throughout the year.
Right. We have a few more questions, but let's get to another film.
Well, let's move to If a Tree Falls, Marshall Curry's new film. And Marshall Curry has been at Full Frame with other films. He made the film Street Fight, which was a finalist for an Academy Award. He also made the film Racing Dreams, and he's an old hand at Full Frame and a wonderful filmmaker. Let's look at a piece of this, and we'll talk about it.
My name is Marshall Curry, and I'm the director.
And I'm Sam Coleman, I'm the co-director.
And our film is If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front, and it is playing in the U.S. documentary competition. If a Tree Falls is a story about a radical environmentalist named Daniel McGowan, who was part of the Earth Liberation Front, and he faced life in prison for participating in 2 arsons against timber companies in Oregon. The spine of the movie is the verite story from the time that our main character was arrested and charged with eco-terrorism until the time that he ultimately went to prison a year later.
This is a story about really impassioned people on both sides. These activists, felt outraged, felt they had to do something, so much so that they wanted to break the law, and then you have the government so certain about them being terrorists.
It's also a story that asks questions. We don't try to answer the questions. We mostly just ask them, how do we define terrorism? When does sabotage or vandalism become terrorism? What is activism? What's effective? What's ethical? What makes sense?
We look at how this movement developed and how Daniel and many other people who were involved, their path went from sort of above ground activism, doing, legal sort of protest, to eventually, doing this sort of underground ELF arson.
And then as we started to dig in, we became surprised over and over and over. First as we started spending time with other former ELF members, then we started spending time with the prosecutor and with the detective who'd worked for years on the case. And we spent time with the arson victims as well. And every time that we would kind of hear a new perspective and a new take on the story, it would shift our perspectives. In some ways, our film is a cautionary tale about activism. It doesn't provide the answer.
Many of the participants or subjects in our film, I think, felt that for whatever reason, this story had never really gotten a good airing or a proper airing. And I think the opportunity to be able to show it at Sundance and to have wider audiences be able to know this story, I think, was incredibly thrilling.
Well, it's Marshall Curry's come to classes here at Duke in the past, and he made that, just going back to his first film, Street Fight, about Cory Booker's first campaign to be mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and he lost in that film and in that election. But Marshall is really interested in these stories where you really don't know where you're going when you start, and many films are made that way, where you begin a film, as he says, they ask a lot of questions, and what's going on here, and many documentary filmmakers are at that place. So what's the story here, and can we ever get to the story, and what is activism, and what is ethical about what is terrorism, where are the lines, what does it mean? And these are the kind of the central issues of our time in a way. I mean, this is a film about the environment in one sense, but it's about sort of what does it mean to be an engaged citizen on the other, and where are the lines we cross and shouldn't cross. And so there's that, but the one thing to emphasize is that we all get interested in these stories, but it takes a real artful documentarian to make something that a lot of people can want to watch. And so it's not just sort of finding a good story. I mean, the Earth Liberation Front's a great story, mm-hmm. but then you got to figure out how to tell the story and tell it in a way that opens up the story rather than closes it down, that makes it more complex rather than simplistic, that gives it multiple dimensions rather than just a singular kind of easy narrative. And that's really the gift of the great filmmaker, just like it's the gift of the great writer or the great artist in general. And Marshall is always been one of my favorites at telling a story, whatever the story. I mean, if you told me a Marshall Curry had a new film, I'd just go see it. It doesn't matter what it's about.
Well, the flip side, or maybe the companion to the storytelling, is credibility.
Right.
And we actually have a very conveniently timed question in an email from Jeffrey, who has a question about credibility. I find that I am willing to swallow any truth presented well in fictional film, like Redford's The Conspirator, but when it comes to documentaries, I'm much more likely to challenge and disbelieve the presentation of facts. Should a documentary filmmaker work harder at winning credibility than a fictional filmmaker? Is there any difference?
Well, there's a difference. I don't know that I mean, I think both filmmakers have to work just as hard. I think he's actually, whether intending it or not, giving a great compliment to the role of documentary, which is that it urges us to question what we've seen, which we probably should be doing with fiction films as well. Mm-hmm. We need to be questioning. We need to wonder, is this the way the story really went? Who really is telling the story? What's the responsibility of the storyteller? But also, what's the responsibility of the viewer in kind of slicing and dicing the story and deciding, that's believable. I can go that way. It seems authentic. It seems actual. It seems, or or I feel like I've been duped. And if you listen to the questions at a film festival for the filmmakers, that's where they always begin. The first question is usually, how long did you spend with people? Translation, you know.
Methodology.
Can I believe you? Or did you just blow in and blow out? Or why did you decide to make your film, you know, to center it more on the wife than the husband? What, you know, and the answer usually helps you really understand. They say, well, we developed a better relationship, or whatever. There's a personal explanation, but I think his point that he may question documentaries is a very good. That's one of the great things that's happened in the last 15 or so years of documentary, because I would say many of the Duke students that come into our contemporary documentary film class, which is in the spring and connected to the festival, they begin with this idea that documentary is a telling of true history, true fact. I mean, there is this kind of
How quaint.
Yeah, exactly. and so now, you know, I would say that that there's a great burden on the documentary filmmaker and a great pressure to tell a story that seems true, that has credibility. That doesn't always mean it's the only truth. We know better than that, but it's got to have credibility. It's got to feel like they know what they're talking about, like they were there.
Are documentarians journalists?
Well, I think that you have to be. Documentarians have to be a number of things. I think they have to have the skills of a journalist in terms of the research and veracity that a journalist ought to have anyway. They have to be artists and like a fiction writer, be able to craft a story and take you through and have a structure and have they have to have a sense of emotion. You know, a documentary without an emotional spine, you know, a journalist may or may not have to. Telling about what happened at the city council meeting is you know, it doesn't have to necessarily have an emotional core, but who wants to sit through an hour and a half film that doesn't emotionally engage you as well as intellectually? So there's the head and heart that the documentary artist has to reach, and both of those have, both the head and the heart test your credibility. Does it really feel like something that's real, that I can believe? Can I see myself in it in any way? And I don't care if it's a Ukrainian 15-year-old in the Ukraine going into a mine. Can I feel some sympathy, some empathy, some way to some familiar connection? It's got to be there.
You are watching Office Hours from Duke University. Our guest today is Tom Rankin, the director of the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke, and we're talking about the Full Frame Film Festival, which is taking place this weekend in Durham, North Carolina, all weekend long. So if you're in the area, you might want to think about coming down and checking some of it out. You can reach us by email at live@duke.edu. You can reach us by the Duke University Facebook page. If you're not a friend, be sure to check the box. And you can also tweet us at Duke Live. Tom, let's go to another film, and then I got more questions.
Let's go to The Interrupters. Let's travel to Chicago, and Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz.
And Steve James did Hoop Dreams.
He did Hoop Dreams. He did No Crossover: The Trial of Allen Iverson, which was at the festival. And he's done a whole bunch of others. He did Stevie. He's got a long list of films. But Hoop Dreams takes up a lot of space in the documentary history course. It's a major film.
Yep. Okay, let's watch.
I'm not no punk or nothing. The only thing came to my mind was retaliate. They got to know they did the wrong person.
Well, it was a violent night in Chicago. 9 people were shot in just 5 hours.
124 people have been killed so far this year, about the number of Americans killed during the same period in Iraq and Afghanistan combined.
Violence is like the great infectious diseases. We're using the methods that are used for reversing any epidemic.
Have there been any conflicts mediated on the front end?
The last 30 days has been nothing but violence. We've had, I think it's 18 shootings in the last 16 days, 10 of them dead.
Most of the violence interrupters come from the hierarchy in some of these gangs, because can't no anybody come in and tell a guy to put his gun down. I have the dirty dozen at the table.
I was 11 years old when my father got killed.
Let's just, I mean, if it's...
He got beat with some baseball bats, and that just messed me up. Started getting myself in trouble. I always found myself thinking about, man, I wish my daddy was here, just to see how I changed and doing something positive, productive, so he could be proud of me.
In order to stop a killing, you have to be able to intercept whispers. You have to work with the have-littles in America. And it's not easy work, because there's no way to resolve conflicts without confrontation.
When I let loose, goddamn, they gon' know. Shouldn't have crossed me. I'm not with ceasefire.
But still, though, man, you got to try to leave that shit alone,
man,
though,
I ain't
man.
even shit alone until I get these motherfuckers.
But you was locked up before for the same shit, though.
Man, I've been locked up 15 years in my life. What that mean?
We just
try to offer you options and solutions to the problem.
Man, fuck this shit. Fuck a problem. Fuck a solution.
Yeah, it's a rough one. But anytime you got a person who will stay there and talk with you, you got a chance of working it out with them. We could go out.
When?
That's what you want to do.
When?
We could go out now.
Right now?
Yeah.
Let me go put my pistol up.
When I was 18, a very close friend of mine was shot. I walked around with a gun on me and just hoping somebody would just come up to me and say, man, what's up? What you is? To this day, everything I do for my victim.
This is where I got clean. This is my colostomy bag.
You end up shooting the guy, man, and the guys were getting killed or dying. And now what? What name did you make up for yourself? Because now you're going to jail, man.
Or doing 30 years.
I want to be able to help out. Some people, I can't. Even as much as I want to, they don't want the help.
Police in Chicago charged 3 teenagers with first-degree murder today.
Darian Albert was attacked as he walked home from school.
I seen the video, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. The first thing that I said was, oh man, I hope his mother does not see this. And I look at my sisters and my brothers today, that was once me.
This is unacceptable for me to be holding this young man's obituary. Let this be a wake-up call. Let this be a stop call.
Who does this baby belong to?
He just hanging around y'all, right? So he see everything that you all do, right? So if this brother right here catch a case, whose fault is it?
Our fault. Teach him righteous. You got it?
The violence interrupters have one goal in mind every day: to stop killings. They're not trying to dismantle gangs.
Powerful stuff.
It's powerful stuff. And we just saw Amina Matthews in that last scene, the woman, who was an ex-gang member. Her dad was one of the most notorious gang leaders in Chicago. She's at the festival and with her husband, and she will talk about the film afterwards. But what's so interesting about this film is called The Interrupters. It's the whole notion built around this organization called Ceasefire, ex-gang members trying to intervene and stop the spread of violence. It takes a kind of the paradigm of infectious disease. Ceasefire does that. Gang violence is like infectious disease. You don't stop it by going out and saying there's good and evil, or let me read to you the Old Testament, let me talk to you about ethics, which are what some of us do in some places. But this notion is that if I infect you, and you'll infect someone else, and it'll never stop. So you got to intervene like you would to stop polio from spreading from one person to the next. And the film follows 3 ceasefire members over a year. One of them is Amina, this powerful woman who's a Muslim married to an imam, and who can go and look at these well, some of them are kids and some of them older, and talk to them about what they're getting ready to do. Again, not as a moral issue, but do they really want to have another funeral? Is this really going to get anywhere? And in that last scene that we just saw, Steve James shot it. He shot almost this whole film himself. I said to him after seeing it, and I was talking to her last night, if Hollywood had tried to write that little scene, and they couldn't have written it better than she spoke it on the street when she's speaking off the cuff, they couldn't have shot it any better. The reaction shots couldn't be any better. And that's documentary, at its best moment. There it is. And they didn't even know it was going to happen. Steve was he was struggling to get enough height, walk up a hill to shoot down, trying to figure it out all on the fly. And there it is right before us. So it really happened, but there's a lot of luck and serendipity and just being there. The whole notion of being there for a year following these folks.
So you're a documentarian. You work with a lot of documentarians. You educate, train, advise documentarians. How do you, and when you're doing a documentary project, you're immersed in the subject, in the people. You, in some cases, you live it. How do you then disengage?
Well, what I say is, the first question students ask when you show work, they say, well, how did you get close to these people? How did you get in? And I always say, well, getting in is easy. It's getting out that's difficult. Because disengaging, it's like, how do you disengage from a good friend? You never do. Steve James and Amina Matthews will be friends forever. And her issues will be his issues. And so, the film comes to an end, and they're at the film festival, and they're celebrating. But you don't ever get done. Steve is still very connected to the two guys in Hoop Dreams. He's now connected to the children, and that's one of the wonderful things about what happens from true engagement. It's also very complicated because how can you ever? Where is closure? A film comes to an end at some point. It's an imposed ending. You got to wrap it up, but the relationships go on, and I think some of us would argue that being documentarians is just an excuse to get to know a lot of people
and go to a lot of parties.
And go to a lot of parties.
We have an email from Linda, in a sense a follow-up from an earlier question that we talked about. Many Americans are enamored with reality TV. Can documentaries reach out to this market and perhaps provide more valuable content and context?
Well, the reaching out is the commercial side of things, I guess, and I would say that the documentary world, we haven't quite figured out. If we had figured that out, we would be. I would say that if many of us would love to replace the reality TV world with real documentaries, but I think it's a tough thing because I think what people are getting from reality TV is a certain kind of vicarious living that is it's obviously fueling something, and it's easy to make fun of it or to see it as something you don't want to. But there's something, it's fueling something, and I think it's different than what documentaries are about. I would love to do a find and replace on my computer and reprogram the television station, but I haven't figured that out.
Okay, well, we're working on it.
We're working on it.
I think we have time for maybe one more film, one or two more. So let's...
Well, one of the another premiere, and this is kind of a homecoming. Nancy Bursky, who lives in Durham, and who was the visionary behind the starting of Full Frame. She came to the center with this idea back when it was called Double Take, and we published a magazine called Double Take. She said, "What about a film festival?" And in 2008, she stepped down from being the executive director of the festival and began making a film called The Loving Story, which is going to premiere later today, actually. Those of you that are in Durham still have time to get there. And The Loving Story is about the Mildred and Richard Loving and 1958 interracial marriage and the court case that it provoked, and a story that's been sort of just sitting there. This is the other thing, documentary makers, artists of all kinds, find these things that, why has this story not been told? That doesn't make any sense in a way, why isn't anybody? Nancy found this incredible film footage that had just been sitting in somebody's closet, archival footage, still photographs. So the research that goes into a film like this is she had seen an obituary for Mildred's death and said, why isn't this story better known? And you sort of follow it back. So you asked earlier, as a documentary filmmaker, kind of a journalist. Well, it's kind of an investigative reporter, a journalist, and it's going to be a really wonderful. I've seen some early cuts of it. It's a wonderful film. It's a story we all need to know about in terms of sort of historical literacy of America. It is, documentary filmmakers are about resisting the forgetfulness of the day-to-day human condition. We erase lots of history, both intentionally, but much of it we erase just by amnesia, and the Loving Story really does resist that whole impulse for amnesia or the whole reality of amnesia, and yet in law schools, and I mean the case has been studied, but here's the human side of it, and so it'll be a wonderful homecoming for Nancy and Elizabeth Haviland James, her director, producer of this film, both living in Durham. Durham's become a place. Elizabeth James moved here from New York because it seemed like a better film community, a good place to live, a good place to work out of, and that's happening over and over again.
All right, let's watch.
I think we just have a still from it, maybe.
Oh,
I don't think we have a clip from the Loving Story. So
okay.
people will have to come.
Okay, 5 o'clock tonight?
5 o'clock this afternoon. Be there. And
what's the, unfair question, what's the most influential documentary that's...
Oh, man. Well, it would depend, I guess, some of the most influential documentaries are some of the early documentaries, and probably for each of us, we would all personally answer it a little differently. It would be one of the, but Edward R. Murrow was a highly influential documentarian, and that whole CBS documentary series, we can look at it now and sort of laugh at some of the structures but in terms of bringing, coming into the home with these kinds of messages. Michael Moore has been very, very influential, I would say, for either people reacting against the other person, and he's the historical documentary doesn't play well in this movement of documentary smorgasbord, I would say, in the sort of art, the move for art and theater releases. But Ken Burns, when we can now look back, say at the Civil War series, and it's hard to look at the whole. I mean, it does, a lot of it feels like you're seeing it over and over and over again, but Burns, the number of people that cut their teeth on a Ken Burns film. I showed earlier this year in a class his Huey Long film. Mm-hmm. PBS style, huge influence.
Well, when you think about Ken Burns got the whole country to watch 9 hours of still pictures.
Right.
It's like a slideshow. It's
exactly.
like going to your grandparents and your great-grandparents
right.
and watching a slideshow. And yet, had a tremendous influence. Did it again with baseball.
Did it with baseball, and has people dig into he goes into the archive, finds this stuff that's just sitting there that people aren't looking at, and sort of takes you through with specialists. And it seems, to many people like sitting in a classroom hearing a lecture, but it's a very important and was early on something that really did direct people to the possibilities. And this is before there was A&E and HBO and these other distribution networks that have broadened our the possibilities for filmmaking, and also the expectation of entertainment. Ken Burns is still, very much a public television filmmaker. I mean, that's where his films go, and he's, his national park, his film on the national parks is a classic kind of public television. I was talking to Bill Luchtenberg, who's the distinguished historian, lives in Chapel Hill, and Bill's been a advisor on every Ken Burns film. And Bill Luchtenberg is, one of the great American historians of the 20th century. For somebody like Luchtenberg, it's just an extension of the classroom and the book.
Who pays for documentaries these days?
All kinds of people. I think it's gotten. That's what's. It is very interesting. So you still have, the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, State Humanities Councils, those kind of folks. You've got corporate sponsors, but you've got an enormous number of individuals who are involved. You've got HBO and A&E. In these European and international films, different countries have film commissions, film boards. It's the $64,000 question everybody has: how do I raise money for my film? And documentary filmmakers can get more out of less than most any entrepreneur or artist I know of, and they'll find, individuals who will land up. They'll find Facebook fundraising, small. I mean, and of course their grants and their funds, and film festivals give cash awards, and then their distribution agreements and arrangements, and distribution has started to for some filmmakers be a good steady source. Then you have somebody like Fred Wiseman, who makes his films are on public television, but who has been at it so long and is such a brand and a mark and has such a credibility as a filmmaker. I'm sure if Fred were sitting here, he'd say his fundraising isn't easy, but yet he's sort of, he's left he's way out of the starting gate and can make his films and get them out there.
Great. You have been watching Office Hours at Office Hours from Duke University. Our guest today has been Tom Rankin, the director of the Center for Documentary Studies. We've been talking about the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival, which is playing this weekend in Durham. If you're in the area, you can still get tickets. Come down to see the shows online. It's at
fullframefest.org.
Fullframefest.org. All the schedules, background, clips from the trailers from the programs. If you have further information, you can visit the CDS website at Duke University, the Full Frame Festival website from Duke. I know where I'm going to be for the next 3 days or so. We didn't talk about Joan Rivers or Page One or Bobby Fischer or any of the other.
We could have gone on and on. Errol Morris has a new film, Tabloid. There's, if anything you want in terms of content, subject, and style of filmmaking, and all of it, the highest quality you can find.
Good. Well, Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And
Mike, this is great.
we'll look forward to not getting any sun this weekend.
That's right.
All right.
Thanks so much.
And thanks for watching.
You.